Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. Have you noticed there is a lot of hype around the Metaverse at the moment? Did you know that 1 in 10 IT decision makers are already operating in the Metaverse, and an incredible 51% expect to be there in 5 years or sooner? And at the same time, a world of virtual reality storefronts and augmented digital experiences could also open up businesses to new types of attacks. For example, if the criminal flooded a Metaverse business front with avatars, could that significantly hinder the operations of a casino, bank or healthcare portal? And what will ransomware look like in the Metaverse? These are a few things that set off the tech spidey sensors in my IT brain. So today I've invited Angel Grant from a company called F5 onto the podcast. We're going to explore all of this. And as organisations build out their visions for what a Metaverse could be, we're going to discuss how they should also be addressing the associated security, privacy and reliability concerns. For anyone thinking of diving into the Metaverse, I think this will be a must listen for you. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the US, where Angel is waiting to join us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Angel Grant at F5 Security. Just a little bit of my background. I grew up in the financial services space. I worked at several banks, and I went to work for a startup online payments company. So at that time, I was the product manager for the industry's first online payments applications. I'll go to a couple banks and tell them about this, and they told us we were crazy. No one's going to bank online, and asked us about our DOS products. And so clearly this online banking thing took off. Then crime started happening. And so I started working with a variety of different cybersecurity companies to integrate that into my online payments application. RSA was one of them. I got recruited over as a product manager for them and worked on a ton of different cybersecurity domains, ranging from authentication, fraud prevention, anti-phishing, threat intelligence, bot and web app security. I also represented on many industry forums advocating for cybersecurity from the start. I was on the board of advisors for the PCI, the Payments Council, as well as FSISAC, NACHA, which is the National ACH Association, and the U.S. Federal Reserve Secure Payments Task Force. And most recently, I just joined F5 this past year as Vice President of Security Product and Market Strategy, focusing on our security and distributed cloud products.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm curious, if I was to take you way back before all of that, can you remember where your passion for tech came from, or just a moment that might have put you on the path that you're on today? Or should I say, what's your origin story, as they say in those movies?
Right. I actually never really saw myself in a tech career. And when I was in college, cybersecurity careers just weren't a thing. So when I reflect on my passion for technology, it actually took several moments through my career to realize I was actually passionate about technology. So when I was working at the bank, for example, I got invited in like a Tiger team to help create their first website. And it wasn't because of my tech experience. It was because I actually understood the mortgage origination process. But then I started dabbling in designing my own websites and doing that as like a side gig. And then even when I started interviewing with RSA, I remember during the interview process thinking like, why would they want to hire me? Like, I'm not this crypto guy who hangs out in a dark corner with the hoodie preaching it's the year of the PKI. However, during my interview process, I actually asked my hiring manager, like, why would you want to hire me? And he said something that has stuck with me throughout my career. And he said, the biggest thing the security industry was lacking were people who actually understood the real business problems that needed to be solved from a security perspective. And so when I reflect on the moments when I had at the bank and during my interview process at RSA, it helps me understand my North Star and the value I add in any of those tech conversations is help them understand that tech is just a means to an end to solve an actual business problem. I work with tons of engineers over my career who'd be like, hey, check out this cool thing. It flashes and beeps and spins. What problems do you think it will solve? And that's kind of like totally backwards on how you're supposed to develop products.
Yeah, you're so right in what you're saying there. And all too often, we've all seen in businesses, technology or solution that is looking for a problem
Right.
rather than the other
Right.
way around. But of course, in your case, that path would lead you to F5
Yeah.
eventually. So can you tell me a little bit more about F5 and also the kind of problems that you solve for your customers?
Sure. Last year, I came to F5 because I was incredibly impressed with their mission to deliver, secure, and optimize any API, any app, anywhere it's located. And F5 actually powers over half the world's applications across all environments, whether it be on premise, cloud, edge, and 70% of the world's largest websites. And they actually have F5 has a very interesting legacy where we've pioneered this space for over 25 years. And we have a proven track record for helping enterprise navigate from Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and now help pioneering through Web 3 opportunities. And F5 really was the only company that both delivers and secures applications. So that unique perspective really helps us help organizations deliver an experience that keeps their customers continuously returning while protecting them all at the same time.
And I'm glad you mentioned Web3 there, because there's just so much talk and some would say hype around the metaverse in particular at the moment. And some people listening will see it as, yes, another technology or solution looking for a problem to solve, while others will say quite enthusiastically, it is a real game-changing moment and businesses need to get on board sooner rather than later. And some decision makers, I think it's worth highlighting, are already operating in the metaverse, and 51% expect to be there in the next 5 years or sooner. But I'm curious, from what you're seeing, do you have any adoption examples so we can understand how it's actually gathering pace?
Yeah, I've been involved with a lot of discussions about what the metaverse actually is and what's possible and how will it work. And it's interesting when I ask people what the metaverse is, you get different responses from pretty much everybody. And most people think of it as, they think gaming or social networking. However, what we're actually seeing is it's becoming the cornerstone of new virtual business models in retail, entertainment, healthcare, and education. And actually, this past holiday season, it was really interesting for me to see how many new metaverse products and services get rolled out. So it's clear that many organizations are really starting to explore ways to blend their digital and physical presence to complete that full customer experience. A couple of good examples of this is even retailers that you would not think would be exploring the metaverse, such as like Bloomingdale's is a perfect example of that. This is a company that's been around 150 years. You don't necessarily equate Bloomingdale's to the metaverse. However, if you think about it, for them to survive for 150 years, they know a thing or two about reinventing themselves. So they just recently opened a new virtual store to stay relevant and attract new generations. And you see companies like Target introducing new ways to check inventory before you go shopping, so you know exactly what aisle it is in the store. And then we're also seeing a lot of sneaker companies get heavily involved. Actually, the other day, my son came home and he was like, "Hey, Mom, you're not going to believe this. Tommy lost his $300 basketball sneakers." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, my first response was, "Well, did you help him look around the court to see if it was under the bleachers?" And he was like, "No, it's not that kind. It's his virtual ones." So he lost his $300 virtual sneakers. And I was like, "What?" So you're seeing companies, even like Nike, launching its swoosh on a Web3 platform, so you can buy in their crypto kit NFTs, which are digital shoes. You're even seeing financial services getting involved. Like JP Morgan Chase launched the Onyx Lounge in Decentraland, which is like a virtual world.
Yeah.
And they're exploring virtual real estate. And you're even seeing Elton John, right? So Elton John's exploring the metaverse and planning on putting on a show. So that should be interesting.
It really should. I'm fascinated on watching this space evolve at the moment. And you mentioned a lot of huge names there that are getting on board early and trying to feel their way around. Do you get to hear on how successful they are, or is it more about establishing an identity at this stage?
At this stage, I think it's more about establishing an identity. People are exploring business models, figuring out how to actually make money, stay relevant as new technology comes. So I think it's just an exploration phase right now.
And of course, I don't want to be the grumpy ex-IT guy here, but in a world of virtual reality storefronts and augmented digital experiences, do you think many businesses also need to be thinking about how this will undoubtedly drive a new wave or different kinds of cyber attacks too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you're a grumpy guy. I think you're a realist when it comes to this. So as we're imagining what the metaverse can actually be, we also must address the security, privacy, and reliability concerns for it to be fully realized, right?
Yeah.
And the metaverse requires tons of data that ultimately has to be shared for it to exist and thrive. So that's where the risk lies for people and brands that are participating in technology companies that are actually enabling that world. At F5, we actually worked with YouGov to survey 500 IT decision makers to get a snapshot of their priorities, particularly now as they're trying to balance, within this the backdrop of economic worries of what they're doing to balance and empower people and organizations. And in one of the survey questions, we saw that 6 in 10 said the metaverse has introduced some form of security complexities in their organization that they're not really equipped to address. And then we also saw 1 in 3 say their organization has already been attacked in relation to the metaverse. So those are organizations that already have metaverse type of business models have already been attacked. And you got to remember, cyber criminals are very opportunistic. So anytime new tech is introduced, cyber criminals will always use disruption to cause disruption. So being in the cybersecurity world for over 20 years, I always look at cybersecurity as more of a psychology and economics game versus a technology game. And that's because they're looking for vulnerabilities within your application, your people, your processes. And we also know that cyber criminals will always start with what they know works. So that's where a lot of times, anytime a new channel gets rolled out, so when organizations had their web channel, then they migrated to launch their mobile channel, criminals will use the tactics they previously used so that what's old is new will continue to carry on as we go into the metaverse. So for example, we're going to continue to see phishing attacks tricking people to download malware. We're going to continue to see theft of goods, but in the metaverse, they're going to be digital goods like NFTs or avatar skins or powers. We're going to still see identity theft. And the metaverse creates an interesting dynamic with identity theft because it's both physical and digital identity theft in the metaverse. And there's going to be new identity theft risks as now there's a potential to even create more powerful deepfakes in the digital version of you.
And of course, in the Web 2 world, we've often seen a distributed denial of service attack that overwhelms the target or surrounding infrastructure with just a flood of internet traffic. So I'm curious, in Web 3, if a criminal was to flood a metaverse business front with avatars, could that also significantly hinder the operations of, I don't know, a casino, bank or healthcare portal in a similar way, do you think?
Yeah, the flood of avatars, you just put an image of like a metaverse flash mob of avatars coming into a spot, maybe dancing like Taylor Swift. I don't know. I have that vision in my head, but yeah, that's a perfect example of an essential, like another form of a DDoS type of attack, which would prevent legitimate customers from getting services like virtual medical assistance from the healthcare provider because there's too many quote unquote patients all coming into the same time. Or if you're trying to get support from your bank, you have a flash mob of avatar customers all coming into at the same time. And of course, I'm thinking about my kids and the way that their generation thinks as schools adopts the metaverse for educational purposes. I can totally see that as a way for kids to get school to get canceled if they do like a flood of avatars at the same time. But in addition to something like that, like DDoS attacks, there's also several types of bot attacks to consider that could also significantly impact organizations in the metaverse from a brand, revenue, and customer sat perspective. So, for example, we should continue to expect to see purchasing or denial of inventory type of bots. which are bots that are basically designed to buy digital goods and services in bulk the moment they go on sale, like an NFT dropped or Taylor Swift tickets. And the goal is really to gain a mass control of inventory, which is typically resold on a secondary market for significant markup. There's also bidding bots, so within the digital world, these bidding bots will make fake bids to manipulate things such as the NFT prices, whether they want to raise them or lower them depending on their resale strategy. So like an increased price bot will purchase low price NFTs, artificially creating a scarcity and boosting the popularity of them, forcing buyers to pay more if they purchase them. You're also going to see more counterfeit bots. So similar to, you buy a Rolex sold on a physical street corner, you're now buying digital fake goods in the virtual street corners, and bots can be used to create that counterfeit goods. And same thing with fake promo bots. We're going to start to see more and more of those as bots masquerading as phishing type of scams to entice users to click on links or take advantage of limited offers within the digital worlds.
And I think we're only just beginning to understand the threats to people and organizations in equal measure as they begin to navigate these new virtual worlds. And as physical and digital experiences become more intertwined and those lines between virtual and the physical world almost disappear, I'm curious, what keeps you awake at night when you're thinking about all these myriad of situations and scenarios that could come about in the future? Because I imagine it is the kind of thing that keeps you up, right?
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot over my career of different attacks. However, when I really think about the metaverse, the types of things that keep me awake at night is really the significant potential for social engineering of vulnerable individuals while they're engaging in the metaverse. That is a very serious risk. And this is because if you think about it from a psychology and sociology perspective, most people tend to let their guard down when they're in more of a virtual world. They're more comfortable talking with strangers and doing activities and providing information in like games that they're involved with, thinking that it's innocent moments or movements or information sharing. And the reality is cyber criminals have already figured out how to gamify identity theft in the digital world. I mentioned how much information is needed to help the metaverse thrive. There's a lot of metadata that's collected when you're engaging in these types of environments. There was a really interesting study done by the Future of Privacy Forum that showed just in a 20-minute gaming session, so this is a 20-minute virtual reality gaming session, it can generate roughly 2 million unique data points. So for example, by getting people to play a simple game within the metaverse, you can easily harvest personal information such as voice characteristics, the height, wingspan, gender, walking gait, geolocation, behavioral profiling information. Again, almost 2 million unique data points just in 20 minutes of a virtual reality gaming session. And that information can be used to conduct identity theft and possibly allow cyber stalkers to better identify you in the physical world too. And as I mentioned before, the possibilities of deepfakes gets heightened and can be used in a lot of different ways. So for example, if a bank adds metaverse customer support channel avatar that you can engage with, to apply for a mortgage, for example, how do you know that all that personal information that you're providing for that application is really going to the bank versus a metafish type of attack? So yeah, that's the social engineering aspect of it is what really keeps me awake at night.
And of course, we are right at the beginning of a new year, and there's going to be a lot of people setting their objectives for the year and wanting to try new things to, as you said earlier, stay relevant in the landscape there. So what advice would you offer any leader or decision maker listening about how they navigate around the security complexities that their organization might not be currently ready to successfully equipped to address when thinking about the metaverse, because it is quite a big leap for a lot. And I'll be thinking about the new shiny features and the technology, etc., maybe neglecting the security aspect. So is there any advice that you would give them?
Yeah, I think the most important things as organizations start to explore new business models that'll emerge from the metaverse and Web3, they really, really, really need to think their security and privacy strategy from the start. So I can talk forever about this. So I'm going to keep it simple here. So I'm going to give 5 tips. All right. So the first one is treat the metaverse as another channel in both your business and security strategy. Just like the example of when you move from web to mobile, to your establishing new business models in the branch or store, the metaverse should be treated as another channel. And you can use your playbook, security and privacy playbook that you used in those other channels, and carry over those best practices into this channel so it doesn't seem so overwhelming. The second tip would be really understand the new types of threats that you're likely to face based on the business models you're rolling out. So even in the metaverse, there's going to be central control points that can be exploited. So examples of that would be poorly designed apps that lead to abuse by bots or scammers, or vulnerability at the code level that would require a solid bot management strategy, or potentially how you're doing authentication in the ways that that's treated can it still potentially lead to credential stuffing and cause account takeover? And as you're doing that, you always need to remember that in security, there's never a done state, never. And that's where we see time and time again, cyber criminals retool quickly as you come up with a countermeasure. So you always have to have a strategy to adapt as quickly as cyber criminals adapt in this situation. The third thing I'd recommend is focus on privacy and compliance from the start as well. So you should assume the same regulations and compliance principles that you have in other channels will apply to the metaverse's world as well. So for example, assume GDPR privacy applies. Assume if you're selling goods and accepting traditional payment methods like credit cards, PCI compliance should still apply. And so even though many privacy regulations don't deliberately use the term metaverse in there and have specific metaverse requirements, assume they will. If an incident happened, assume the same principles will be applied and you will be accountable, even if those don't specifically call out that. So the fourth thing is remember third-party code vulnerabilities. These will continue to be exploited in this channel like they are in your other channels, and it needs to be part of your strategy. So for example, if you're developing an SBOM or a software bill of material for your other channels, this should also be part of the metaverse channel too. And then the fifth one, and this is, I actually think is probably the most important one, is realizing that your security and privacy strategy is not a do-it-yourself project. It takes a community, and organizations can really control their own destiny as they explore how they want to thrive in the metaverse. So things they should do for that are have the best practices of engaging with trusted advisors that understand both the problem and take the time to understand their unique business models to fit the solutions that are both secure and seamless to encourage growth within their organization. And I also strongly encourage organizations who are passionate about getting involved in the metaverse to become engaged and involved with the many different industry associations and groups that are trying to help structure what the metaverse should look like. So there's groups like Metaverse Standards Organization, or the Open Metaverse Alliance, or the XR Safety Initiative, all which are focusing on ways to improve interoperability, standardization, and security. So get involved. Control your own destiny. So those would be the 5 best practices I would recommend if you're exploring going into the metaverse.
Fantastic advice. And as we said at the very beginning, there is a lot of hype in this space at the moment, but there's a lot of exciting things to come. And I know Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook are all working on an AR headset at the moment, or rumored to be. So we kind of know where things are heading once mainstream adoption of these technologies occurs. And I think for the metaverse to ascend, it must be continuously designed and shaped by solutions that are seamless and secure to secure that adoption. But do you think that's going to happen, or well, I think we kind of possibly agree that it will, but how long do you think it will take for us to get to that ideal place?
Yeah, so I do think it's going to happen. And again, I mentioned how early in my career I continuously heard no one's going to transact online.
Yeah.
And clearly, we have seen that technology advance over the years from 1.0, 2.0, now 3. And it's interesting to see, like even McKinsey put out a report that over 120 billion was invested in building out metaverse technology and infrastructure in the first 5 months, only 5 months of 2022. So that was more than double all of 2021, which was about 57 billion. So clearly there's a lot of skin in the game, and clearly a lot of people are betting on its success. However, again, securing the metaverse from cybercrime is one of the greatest challenges, slowing the advancement of this new digital environment. And we're even seeing the likes of Interpol get involved. They just announced the creation of their global metaverse police to get ahead of it. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm a believer. I believe the next 3 years will be a fun exploration horizon where organizations are going to really figure out like what's profitable business models, what does interoperability look like, what are compliance standards should be for the metaverse, and how do we address the new security concerns? There's a lot of work to do, but it's great to see a lot of cross-industry collaboration to move this forward.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast today. So many exciting areas we've covered in a short amount of time. And we began the podcast talking about your origin story, where as we come full circle, I'm now going to ask you to leave everyone listening with a book that you can recommend, or a book that means something to you that we can add to our Amazon wish list. All I'm going to ask is, what are you going to leave everyone listening with today? And is there a reason why there for that choice too?
Sure. So one book that inspired me was a book called Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge by Ed O. Wilson.
Yeah.
And so although this book was written over 20 years ago, it is so still incredibly relevant, even to the metaverse conversation we just had today. So the premise behind this book was about the power of uniting unrelated disciplines like sciences and humanities to conquer new problems. And it really inspired me to think differently in my career as I was looking at the cybersecurity space. So after I read this book years ago, I actually wrote a thesis around cybersecurity consilience and how the industry should think differently on how we protect against cybercrime using non-traditional technology. So for example, other industries were using biometrics, like the healthcare industry. That wasn't at that moment being really used within the cybersecurity space, or behavioral biometrics, or understanding the psychology of crime and individuals as they engage to improve security effectiveness. So it applies into the metaverse as well, and a lot of those principles are still very relevant. Ed Wilson has a whole series of really interesting books, and he was a great individual who focused on biodiversity and created forums for the Half Earth Project and things like that. So beyond the book, I would recommend even just taking a look at some of the other initiatives that he has out there.
Fantastic. I'll get that added to our Amazon wish list. And finally, before I let you go, for anyone just wanting to find out more information about anything we talked about today, learn more about F5, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, we have like one of the best website URLs. So it's f5.com, and our Twitter handle's at F5. Very simple to find.
Wow, I dread to think how much that domain name is worth. It's a killer domain name, isn't it? F5.com.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, we've been around 25 years. So yeah. We were one of the first ones to be able to grab some domain names.
Love it. Well, I've loved chatting with you today around the new world of virtual reality storefronts, augmented digital experiences. I think it's all going to evolve over the next few years. And as you said a few moments ago, the next 3 years, I think it's going to be incredibly exciting place to explore. I'm looking forward to where and how it evolves, but I'd love to stay in touch with you, get you back on maybe later next year, see how this is getting on. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing your insights with me today. I appreciate it, Angel.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview as much as I did. But a quick reminder that this podcast is brought to you by Flipper, the #1 marketplace to buy and sell online businesses and startups. So the question I'm going to ask you before I go is, do you own or run an online business? And have you ever considered selling your site, your store, your tech, or your app? Well, with world-class combined matching technology, dedicated brokers, and end-to-end services, all at the most efficient price, Flipper is making selling your online business simple. So to get a free valuation for your business, simply visit flipper.com/techtalks, where each month thousands of online business owners are exiting with Flipper. Again, to learn more, visit flipper.com/techtalks. So a huge thank you to Angel for coming on here and describing how for the metaverse to ascend, it must be continuously designed and shaped by solutions that are also seamless and secure. So much food for thought there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, the future of the metaverse, where it's heading, how to secure it, and any stories around early adoption. I'd love to hear those in particular. But as always, you can do that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. techblogwriter.co.uk is my website, where there's over 2,200 interviews. And Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. But that's it for today's episode. So a huge thank you for listening to the podcast as always. And I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. But until next time, don't be a stranger.